sheets, drumming against the windows of the small animal shelter on the edge of town. Inside, a cold, desolate silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional shuffle of paws against the concrete floor. It was another dreary afternoon at Paws and Heart's shelter, a place where the forgotten, abandoned, and unwanted animals came to rest, often with no hope of finding a home. Shelves of cages lined the walls, each containing animals with a story of their own. Yet one stood out among the rest. In the far corner of the shelter, behind a faded sign that read "Special Needs," sat a small dog, curled up in a corner. His name was Rocky. Rocky was no ordinary dog. His left hind leg had been severely injured when he was younger, a wound that never healed properly. Now, it left him with a permanent limp, causing him to drag his leg when he walked. His fur was a patchwork of scars, and his eyes, while gentle and full of love, often seemed to carry the weight of an unspoken sorrow. Despite his disability, Rocky had a heart as big as any dog could have. Yet, no one seemed to care. Day after day, potential adopters passed by his cage, their eyes scanning the others' healthier dogs with bright, perky ears and wagging tails. They passed by Rocky without a second glance, as if his disability made him invisible. The staff at the shelter had tried everything to get him adopted. They had taken extra care of him, providing him with a cozy bed and special food, but nothing seemed to help. It was the same story every time. No one wanted him. Rocky's days consisted of watching the world pass him by. He would sit at the edge of his cage, his good leg trembling with anticipation, hoping that today would be the day someone would take him home. But as the days turned into weeks, and then months, his hope began to wane. The other dogs, despite their flaws, were given second chances. But Rocky, he seemed destined to stay behind. One particular afternoon, when the shelter seemed quieter than usual, a car pulled into the parking lot. A small silver sedan, its windows fogged up from the rain, rolled to a stop near the entrance. A woman in her mid-30s, with short, dark hair and a tired but determined expression, stepped out. She was followed by a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly to her chest. They entered the shelter, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet that lined the hallways. The woman greeted the staff with a warm smile, and they exchanged pleasantries as they showed her around. The little girl, however, was unusually quiet. She kept her eyes lowered, her small fingers twirling nervously around the frayed edge of her stuffed animal's ear. The woman paused in front of a cage that held a bouncy golden retriever puppy, its tail wagging furiously. "He's so sweet," she said, her voice warm. The girl didn't respond, though she glanced at the puppy briefly before turning her gaze to something else. And that's when she saw him, at the far end of the room, near the back wall. Rocky sat in his cage, watching her with soft, pleading eyes. His good leg trembled slightly as he tried to stand, his tail giving a tiny wag as he took a cautious step forward. The little girl's heart ached when she saw him. There was something in his eyes, something so familiar and full of pain that it made her feel as though she understood him, understood the way he had been overlooked, cast aside simply because he was different. "Mom," the girl said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman turned, a look of curiosity crossing her face. "Yes, sweetie." The girl took a step toward Rocky's cage, her tiny hand reaching out to gently press against the cold metal bars. "I want him." The woman's eyebrows furrowed in surprise. "Him? But honey, don't you see he's not like the other dogs. He's different." "I know," the girl said, her voice growing more resolute. "But he's the one I want. I can see it in his eyes. He's sad, like me." The woman's face softened as she crouched down to her daughter's level. "Sweetheart, I understand. But you know we can't just take any dog. We have to make sure it's the right one for us, the right fit for our family." "I don't care if he's different," the girl insisted. "I want him to come home with us. I know he needs us." The woman's heart broke at the words. The little girl had always been a compassionate soul, someone who couldn't bear to see another being in pain, especially not an innocent one. But the woman also knew the reality. Raising a dog with a disability was a huge responsibility, one that required patience, time, and understanding. She looked at her daughter, torn between the overwhelming love in the child's eyes and the uncertainty of what adopting Rocky would truly mean. "Are you sure, sweetie?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "You know it won't be easy." The little girl nodded firmly, her eyes bright with conviction. "I'm sure. I can take care of him. I promise." A long silence followed as the woman studied her daughter's face. And then, with a sigh, she nodded. "Okay, let's see if we can make this work." The decision was made, and the adoption process began. Over the next few days, the woman and her daughter returned to the shelter to visit Rocky. They spent time with him in the play area, the little girl sitting on the ground while Rocky limped around her, nudging her gently with his nose. She would laugh, her joy filling the air like sunlight breaking through clouds, while the woman watched from a distance, her heart swelling with emotion. Rocky seemed to sense her kindness, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed to trust again. It was a slow, tender process, teaching Rocky how to navigate his new home, showing him where he could rest, and making sure he knew he was loved. The little girl would often sit with him for hours, reading stories aloud in a soft, melodic voice, as if to reassure him that he was safe, that he was no longer alone. As the weeks passed, Rocky began to change. The sorrow in his eyes lessened, replaced by a warmth that he had never known. His limp was still there, but he no longer dragged his leg with the same weariness. The little girl's unwavering love seemed to work miracles, and slowly, Rocky started to believe that he truly belonged somewhere, that he had finally found a place where he would be scars, and all. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were days when the world seemed too overwhelming for both of them. The little girl would cry when she saw how other children stared at Rocky, whispering and pointing, afraid of his disability. But every time that happened, she would take his paw gently in hers and whisper, "They don't know you like I do." And Rocky would nuzzle her hand in response, as if he understood that it didn't matter what anyone else thought. All that mattered was the love they shared, the love that had transformed him from a forgotten, unwanted dog into a cherished companion, a member of a family that had chosen him despite his imperfections. In the end, it wasn't just Rocky who had found healing in the embrace of unconditional love. It was the little girl, too, who had learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about accepting each other's flaws, supporting one another through the tough times, and never giving up. As the years passed, Rocky's limp never fully went away, but the scars on his heart did. And the little girl grew, no longer just a child with a big heart, but a young woman who knew that love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Together, they proved that no dog, no matter how broken, was ever truly beyond repair. All it took was the right person to see them, truly see them, for who they were. And that person was a little girl who had found beauty in a disabled dog when no one else could. As the years passed, the bond between the little girl, now growing into a compassionate and strong young woman, and Rocky only deepened. What began as a simple act of kindness, a gesture of love for an overlooked dog, had blossomed into something profound. It wasn't just a girl and her dog. It was a shared journey of healing, growth, and mutual understanding. Rocky, the once forgotten dog with his limp and scars, had transformed into the epitome of resilience. And the little girl, now approaching adolescence, had become the embodiment of hope, teaching everyone around her the true meaning of acceptance and love. Each day with Rocky was a lesson. She had started by reading to him, her soft voice telling him stories of magical lands and brave knights. But over time, those stories became real-life lessons. Rocky had become her confidant, the one who listened patiently as she poured out her heart, her worries, and her dreams. His presence was her anchor, the steady heartbeat that reminded her that even in moments of uncertainty, love could heal all wounds. At school, the young girl, now called Emily, began to shine in a new light. Her classmates often came to her with questions about the dog she had adopted, the dog they once thought was unadoptable, the dog with the limp and the scars. They wanted to know how she managed, how she made it work when so many others had turned away. Emily, ever humble, simply smiled and shared her story, reminding them that love was a choice, that every creature, no matter their flaws, deserved a chance. Emily's family, who had initially hesitated to adopt Rocky, had also been transformed by his presence. Her parents, once worried about the challenges of caring for a disabled dog, now found themselves swept up in his gentle spirit. Rocky was no longer just Emily's dog. He had become a beloved family member, and his presence filled their home with warmth. They made adjustments to accommodate his disability, installing ramps and soft bedding. But it was the emotional space they carved out for him that made all the difference. He was treated with the same love and respect as any other dog in the household, no longer defined by his disability, but by his unwavering loyalty, his playful nature, and his heart that had been healed by the love he had so longed for. It wasn't just the family who had been impacted. The community around them began to take notice of the special bond that Emily and Rocky shared. The local animal shelter, Paws and Hearts, had invited Emily to speak at their annual fundraiser, where she shared the story of how a little girl had fallen in love with a dog that no one else wanted. She spoke of Rocky's courage, his determination to overcome his physical limitations, and how, together, they had created a life full of joy and adventure. The audience, many of whom had never considered adopting a dog with special needs, left that evening with a new perspective on what it truly meant to love an animal. Emily's story was no longer just about a girl and a dog. It had become a message of hope, one that inspired others to open their hearts and homes to animals that needed them the most. Rocky, once confined to the shadows of the shelter, now walked with pride. His limp, though still present, was no longer a symbol of defeat. It was a mark of survival, a testament to the life he had built with Emily and her family. And as the years went on, Rocky grew older, his muzzle turning silver, his steps slower, but his heart, if anything, had only grown stronger. Emily, who had once been the little girl who had asked for him, now found herself the protector of the very dog who had once been discarded. They spent their days together walking through the park, watching sunsets, and curling up on the couch in the evenings, their hearts beating in sync. Emily had learned the true meaning of patience, of unconditional love, and of sacrifice, and in turn, Rocky had taught her that no creature, no matter how broken, was beyond repair. He had learned to trust again, to love again, and to find peace in the home that had once been a stranger to him. But as with all journeys, there came a time when the path began to wind toward its end. Rocky's health began to decline. His once vibrant energy was now tempered with weariness. His steps, once firm and determined, had slowed considerably, and his breathing grew labored. Emily, now in her teenage years, could see the signs that time was running out. The inevitable moment was approaching, the moment when she would have to say goodbye to the dog who had been with her through every moment of her life. One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily looked at Rocky and whispered softly, "Thank you for being with me all this time. I'm so lucky to have had you." Rocky, ever the loyal companion, nuzzled her hand, his eyes still full of the same unwavering love he had given her all these years. The next day, with a heavy heart and a tear in her eye, for one last walk in the park. The wind was gentle, the sky painted in hues of pink and purple. She knew that today was the day. She had called the vet earlier that morning, knowing it was time to let him go, to set him free from the pain that had begun to weigh him down. She could see it in his eyes. He was ready. He had fought so hard, had given so much, and now he was ready to rest. As they walked through the park, Emily spoke softly to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'll never forget you, Rocky. You've made me who I am today. You taught me everything about love, about strength, and about never giving up." Rocky, his head held high, walked beside her, his limp no longer a source of sorrow, but of pride. He had lived a life full of love, had found the one person in the world who saw him for who he truly was. And that was enough. They reached their favorite spot, the place where they had first met, under the large oak tree. Emily sat down, her hands resting gently on Rocky's back as she whispered, "It's okay, Rocky. You don't have to keep fighting. You've done enough. You've given me everything I ever needed." And with that, Rocky lay down beside her, his body relaxed, his breathing slowing. Emily stayed with him, her heart breaking but full of gratitude as she held him in her arms. She knew that he had found his peace. In the days that followed, the pain of losing Rocky was immense. But Emily knew that his legacy lived on. She continued to share his story, telling others about the dog who had been abandoned, the dog who had been broken, and how he had found a family, a home where he was loved, not despite his flaws, but because of them. Emily never forgot what Rocky had taught her, and she carried those lessons with her for the rest of her life. That love is unconditional, that it transcends all boundaries, and that even the most broken souls can heal if given the chance. As Emily grew older, she became an advocate for animals with special needs, working with shelters to help other dogs like Rocky find their forever homes. She spent her life giving back the love that Rocky had given her, ensuring that his memory would live on in every life she touched. And every time she walked into a shelter, she would look at the dogs who were overlooked, the ones who were considered too old or too broken to be loved. And she would smile, knowing that somewhere in the heart of a little girl, there had once been a love so pure that it had healed a broken dog's heart. Rocky may have been gone, but his spirit lived on in the world he had changed, in the heart of the little girl who had seen him for what he was, not a broken animal, but a beautiful soul deserving of love. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all. As the years unfolded after Rocky's passing, Emily found herself carrying on the legacy of the dog who had once changed her world. There were times when she would close her eyes, and the memory of his soft brown eyes and the sound of his gentle breath would flood her heart, a bittersweet reminder of the dog who had walked beside her through the best and worst of times. She often visited the park where they had spent countless hours together. Each time she stood beneath the old oak tree, she would smile, as if Rocky was still with her, watching over her with that same unyielding love, though the pain of his absence never fully faded. Emily had come to realize that some loves weren't meant to be permanent. They were meant to change you, to shape you, to give you a sense of purpose that would stay with you forever. Her journey with Rocky had been a spark, a flame that ignited a passion within her to help those who were overlooked, those who had been discarded, just as Rocky had been. Emily had grown into a young woman of compassion, driven by the need to make a difference. She had become a voice for animals with special needs, speaking at shelters, advocating for the disabled and neglected dogs that so often went unnoticed. Every time she shared Rocky's story, it was as if she was reliving those tender moments with him all over again. The bond they had shared, the healing they had both experienced. It was a story of redemption, not just for Rocky, but for herself. Her work brought her into contact with countless families, young children, and elderly couples, all searching for a companion to fill the emptiness in their lives. But Emily had become more than just an advocate for these animals. She had become a symbol of hope. People began to trust her, to listen when she spoke about adopting special needs dogs, when she told them about the joy that could be found in loving a dog who was different. It was a message that resonated, one that struck deep into the hearts of those who had once believed that certain dogs were beyond saving. But Emily knew better. She had lived through the transformation herself. Rocky had taught her that love had no limits, that no creature, no matter their flaws, was beyond the capacity for happiness. And it was this belief that she carried with her every day. There was one particular day, a cold winter morning, when Emily walked into the shelter with a sense of urgency. She had heard about a dog, a small terrier mix, who had been brought in after being found abandoned on the side of the road. The dog had been hit by a car, and the shelter workers had done their best to treat his wounds. But the little dog had lost his ability to walk. His name was Max, and he was the picture of misery. His fur was matted, his eyes dull with fear, and he trembled uncontrollably whenever anyone came near. Emily felt a deep pang in her heart as she looked at him. He reminded her so much of Rocky when they had first met, the same fear, the same hopelessness in his eyes. She knew in that moment that she couldn't let him go. This was her chance to give another dog the love he deserved, just as she had done for Rocky all those years ago. After speaking with the shelter staff and making sure Max was healthy enough for adoption, Emily made the decision. She would take him home. It was a decision that felt like destiny, like the universe had placed Max in her path for a reason. She promised herself that she would do everything in her power to help him heal, just as she had helped Rocky. The transition into Emily's home was difficult at first. Max, much like Rocky, struggled with the change. He had been abandoned and hurt, and the world felt like a cruel place to him. But Emily, with all the patience and love she had cultivated over the years, was determined. She took it slow, giving him time to adjust, showing him that she would not abandon him, that she would be there every step of the way. Slowly, Max began to trust her. He began to wag his tail when she approached, to nuzzle her hand with tentative affection. It was a long road, but Emily was prepared for it. She knew what it was like to watch a dog transform from a broken shell into a beloved companion, and she was committed to doing the same for Max. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emily worked with Max every day, helping him regain strength in his weakened legs, providing him with the care he needed. It was a labor of love, one that required immense patience, but it was rewarding in ways that Emily could never have imagined. Max became stronger, both physically and emotionally. His once dull eyes began to sparkle with life again, and the trembling that had plagued him slowly ceased. He began to explore his new world with cautious curiosity, sniffing at the corners of the house and wagging his tail when Emily returned home. Though he still couldn't walk on his own, Emily made sure he had everything he needed to feel loved and secure. The bond between Emily and Max grew as strong as the one she had shared with Rocky. Max had become her new companion, her new best friend. But there was something different this time. Max wasn't a replacement for Rocky. He was his own unique soul, with his own history and his own story to tell. And just as Emily had helped Rocky find healing, she was now giving that same gift to Max. One evening, as Emily sat beside Max on the couch, her heart full of love and gratitude, she realized something. She realized that she wasn't just healing these dogs. They were healing her too. Each dog that came into her life, each soul she rescued, was helping her understand the depth of unconditional love. It was a love that transcended everything: pain, loss, fear. It was a love that could never be taken away, a love that would stay with her forever. Years later, Emily found herself sitting on a park bench, with Max lying peacefully by her side, the sun setting in the distance. She thought of Rocky, of the dog who had started it all, and a smile tugged at her lips. It had been a long journey, one full of challenges and heartbreak, but it had also been the most rewarding journey of her life. She had given her heart to the animals that needed it the most, and in return, they had given her a sense of purpose, a sense of peace. Emily looked at Max, his eyes still filled with the same quiet wisdom that Rocky had once had. She knew that the journey would continue, that there would be more dogs in need of her love and care. But she was ready. She was ready to continue the work that Rocky had started, to carry on the message of hope, of healing, and of love that could change the world, one dog at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily whispered to Max, "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me the chance to love again." In the distance, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind seemed to answer her, a gentle reminder that the cycle of love, healing, and hope would continue, forever and always.